Right, well, it's the last of the summer sunshine today because from tomorrow the weather is looking cold, wet and miserable. So I thought what better way than to enjoy the last few hours of summer sun than shredding a few of the local trails. Now, I could do that on my brand new carbon fibre gravel bike, but I've had another idea that might make it just a little bit more fun. This is the Touroll U1 e-mountain bike, which I've had for a few months now and I've used quite a few times. So I thought now would be a great time to tell you guys a little bit about it. Now, as you can see, it is already built up, and that's because, as I say, I've used it quite a few times over the summer. So I can't actually show you the build process, but I have to say it was pretty much the easiest bike that I've ever put together. The only thing you have to do is put the handlebars on the stem and screw the faceplate on at the front, and then throw the front wheel on and you are away. So even the most non-mechanically minded person out there should be able to put this together without any problems at all. Now, I'll come on to the reason why it's already built up in a little bit, but first of all, let me take you through a few of the specs while I'm out on the road. So let me give you a few headline numbers on this thing. It comes in a 26-inch and a 29-inch wheel version. It has a fully UK road legal 250 watt motor, which is in the rear hub and uses a speed sensor. It's running a 3x7 Shimano Tourney group set, and it's made of steel. Yes, steel. And because of that, I know you're going to want to know how much this thing weighs. Well, the 26-inch wheel version comes in at just under 22 kilos, and the 29-inch wheel version is 23.5 kilos. Now, that may not seem light, but when you consider that the battery alone weighs just over 2 kilos, and then you add the rear hub motor into that, it doesn't take too much more to get over 20 kilos. And that is why I'm starting this review on the bottom of a hill around the corner from me, because I want to see just how difficult this thing is to take up a hill using no power whatsoever. Let's do this. So starting off in first gear coming up that hill, I have to say that it didn't feel too dissimilar to just riding a standard mountain bike. And especially with the massive amount of gears that you've got on that 3x7 Tourney setup, you should be able to conquer pretty much any hill. And coming up that hill without power certainly feels easier than the Treadway E26 e-bike that I tested a little while ago. But in fairness, that is a fat tyre e-bike and a completely different kettle of fish. So in terms of the group set setup, you get a 14 to 28 freewheel at the back and a 42, 32, 24 triple chainring at the front. In any case though, if you do find yourself having to ride this thing with no power, it at least won't be too difficult to limp it home. And when you do turn the power on, it has 3 pedal assist modes. So I can set the pedal assist setting that I want using this fairly rudimentary controller. And to be fair, although it is fairly basic, it does do everything you need it to do and tells you everything you need to know. It's got your power on button, your light switch, a battery gauge to show the current charge state of the battery, and then a mode button to change between your pedal assist settings. Now, yes, it might be helpful to have a speedo on there, but as I say, this thing is completely road legal and limited to 25 kilometers per hour or 15.5 miles per hour. So it's largely unnecessary, to be honest. So on this lowest setting, the motor will cut out at 12 kilometers per hour or about 7.5 miles an hour. In the middle setting, it will cut off at 18 kilometers an hour or about 12 miles per hour. And at the top, as I say, it's limited to 25 kilometers per hour or 15.5 miles per hour. Now, on the point of this thing being completely road legal with its 250 watt motor, you can ride this and be rest assured that you won't be breaking any laws, and even better than that, you're incapable of breaking any laws, and that's because this thing doesn't come with a throttle to allow moving the bike without pedaling, and also the speed cannot be de-restricted, which is possible on a number of other e-bikes. So if you are the type of person that likes to follow the letter of the law completely, then this might be the bike for you. In terms of range, Touroll say that the U1 will do 65 kilometers on a full charge, and unlike some other e-bike manufacturers who post huge battery ranges, but only if you're going at a snail's pace in the lowest possible setting, Touroll actually say that you'll get the full 65 kilometers on this thing, carrying a 75 kilo load. To be fair, I'm a little bit more than that, but traveling at 15 kilometers per hour. Now, okay, 15 kilometers per hour isn't going to be breaking any land speed records anytime soon, but it's not exactly a snail's pace. So if you need this just to keep up with the family on days out, or you're using it for a gentle commute through your town or city, then it should be perfect. Now, they do also say that that range is verified at 26 degrees Celsius, which is very specific. So I can only imagine that in colder weather, you're not going to get as much of a range from the battery. But to be fair, that is to be expected because all batteries tend to be less effective in colder weather. On the point of temperature and climate, I did have quite a few questions on my last e-bike review video about what it was like, or what it would be like in the wet. So I know that is obviously a bit of a concern for some of you guys, so I thought you'd appreciate the official line from Touroll regards this bike. Now Touroll say that the U1 is IPX4 rated. Now that means that it will repel splashes of water from any direction. However, Touroll do say that the battery is designed to be water resistant, but they strongly recommend that you don't take it out in bad weather when it's raining. So if you were planning on buying this bike to use it in the winter for your commute, then that might be a deal breaker for you. So what else does this thing have? Well, it comes with the usual lockable battery to stop anyone nicking it. It comes with a front and rear light included, and it comes with the usual multi-tool to build the thing up, which are all very nice things. It also comes with some fairly chunky and knobbly tyres, and I have to say they have fared pretty well over the summer whilst I've used this. It's dealt admirably with tarmac, dirt trails and compacted gravel. The 26-inch wheel version of this bike comes with 2.1-inch wide wheels, whereas the 29-inch wheel version comes with 2.25-inch wheels. That's like 53mm and 57mm for those of you in the road world. It does also have 160mm disc rotors, which, to be fair, I thought it would have a little bit bigger than that. For something that weighs as much as this does, I would have thought 180mm would have been a little more standard. They are also cable actuated disc brakes. Now, I've made no secret in the past, and I still make no secret of the fact that I don't really like cable actuated disc brakes. I had them for a number of years on my road bike, and at times they just felt a little bit spongy. In fairness to these ones though, I've never really felt like I'm gonna have a problem when I've needed to brake at any point, so I've no reason to believe that they wouldn't stop me in an emergency if I needed to. Having recently moved over to hydro brakes on both my road and gravel bikes though, I think maybe now I'm just a little bit spoiled. As I say though, I've had no major problems with these brakes, so again, there's no reason to think they shouldn't work perfectly. In complete fairness for this thing though, for the price you're paying for it, you can't really expect too many features like fancy LCD screens and full hydro brake setups. And that brings me nicely onto the next subject, the price. And you might want to sit down for this, because for the 26-inch wheel version in the UK, you can pick this thing up for £590. Yes, £590. Now, to put that into context, a Halford's own brand Carrera Vengeance non-e-bike is going to set you back the best part of 400 quid. So for an extra 200 quid, you can get yourself full e-bike capabilities. And for even further context, if you wanted to go for the Carrera Vengeance e-bike, you'd be spending upwards of £1,100. And even when you look at the 29-inch wheel version of this, you're only spending £640. So it's only an extra 50 quid or so for the big boy wheels if you're so inclined. And while we're talking of the Carrera Vengeance, that frame does seem to strike a remarkable resemblance to this one that I'm riding. Now, I've spoken extensively before about frames for many different manufacturers coming out of exactly the same factory in China, so no further comment on that. But when you are looking at pretty much the same product for about half the price, well, that's got to be fairly attractive. So with all that said, what's this thing actually like to ride? Well, remarkably comfortable, actually. You've got a suspension fork up front with around about 60-65mm of travel, although there is no official word of that on the Touroll website. And although that might not seem a huge amount of suspension, bear in mind this thing does weigh 23.5 kilos, so you're not going to be throwing it off any massive jumps anytime soon. That's going to need 100mm of travel or thereabouts. Also, despite the wheels being fairly knobbly and bumpy, it does actually deal quite well with the tarmac, and as I said earlier, coming up that hill, riding it on the road feels like pretty much just a standard mountain bike, even without the power. So I thought I'd just come to a quick stop to have an important chat with you about a feature on this bike, because e-bikes generally fall largely into two categories: those with a cadence or speed sensor and those with torque sensors. Now, to just explain that a little bit, a torque sensor basically tells the motor as soon as you put your foot down on the pedal. It judges how much pressure you're putting through the pedals, and then it sends the requisite amount of power to the hub. Now these are generally a little bit more expensive and considered a bit more high tech. They stop you from using so much battery power because as soon as you stop pedaling, the motor turns off, so that means you can end up riding a lot further on a fully charged battery. Now in contrast, the other type of sensor are cadence or speed sensors. Now they work by sensing the speed that the bike is going before it will kick the motor in and send you on your way. In contrast to torque sensors, speed and cadence sensors are generally a lot cheaper, which is why you find them on lower end bikes. Now that's not to say that they don't have their place, but it can mean that if you're trying to get uphill on a bike, it can take a couple of seconds for the motor to kick in before you're then sent on your way. This one, the Touroll U1, I have to say I've been fairly impressed. It actually only takes about half a second to a second for the motor to kick in and for it to start pushing you on, so it's not too bad at all. And as I mentioned again earlier, coming up that hill in first and second gear, you're moving pretty easily anyway, and at most it's only a second before you start getting pushed along. So although there is that trade-off between torque sensors and speed cadence sensors, for this bike in particular I've actually been quite impressed with it, especially as I've already mentioned the low price point of this bike, because you are looking to add a good few £100 extra if you wanted a bike with a torque sensor. And as it stands with this thing, when the power does come in, you do get a fairly rapid burst of energy, so it doesn't really take too much to push you along with ease. I have to say then that I do really like this bike, and when I looked online and on YouTube for other similar reviews for this brand and for this bike specifically, I could only find 2 or 3 others by UK content creators. That said, there are a number of videos from European content creators, so I can only imagine that Touroll have gone hard on their marketing in the EU, and now they're trying to break in to the British market. That's no bad thing though, because that generally means that there may be some incentives to buy this thing coming up in the next few months. Coming on to the subject of who this bike might be suited for brings me to the reason that I've already built it up, and that's because we've used it quite extensively already over the summer, chiefly by my wife. Now, my wife is not the keenest cyclist in the world, but she does enjoy getting out on 2 wheels when we go for family rides with the kids. The problem though is because she is only 5'1" and weighs only slightly more than a moist napkin, she doesn't have the greatest leg power in the world. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not the sort of bloke that would leave a lady spluttering in my dust as I fly off on my bike ahead. However, my son, who is a bit of a speed demon and fairly competitive, it must be said, does like to get ahead quite a bit, so I do need to catch him up every so often to rein him in, and that means my wife is generally left lagging behind, with even my 10-year-old daughter sometimes having to wait for her to catch up. Having this bike over the summer then has been a bit of a boon for her. For my birthday a couple of months ago, we went down to Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk and we did a ride around a few of the trails there, and she absolutely loved it, it has to be said. Having fun? She had no problem keeping up with the rest of us, and she had such little problem using this bike that on some of the flatter sections she actually ended up turning the battery off and just riding it as a standard manual ordinary bike, whatever you want to call it. Now, as I say, she is 5'1", and in terms of height, Touroll say that the 26-inch wheel version is good for people from 5'1" to 6'3", but this 29-inch wheel version is best suited for people 5'3" to 6'5". As I say though, the wife's 5'1" and she rode this 29-inch wheel version really easily, so those numbers do have a little bit of a tolerance either side. All in all then, this Touroll U1 is a very simple, no-nonsense e-bike. It's a real no-frills offering, but actually I quite like it for that reason. It's not trying to be big and showy and show off all the latest and greatest features. It is a proper utilitarian bike that gets whatever job it needs doing done. And for the price, I think it is an absolutely incredible bike. Now, if I was being really nitpicky, and I mean really nitpicky, the one thing I would probably change about this bike is those mechanical disc brakes, changing them out for hydraulic disc brakes. But again, that's only a very minor thing, and I've had no reason to suspect that these brakes wouldn't stop me in an emergency should I need them. And so in conclusion, for around about the £600 mark for either size version, I think this is a pretty solid offering of an e-bike. But what do you guys think though? If you are an e-bike skeptic, has this bike, the price and its features, changed your mind and made you think that maybe an e-bike for utilitarian purposes is the way to go? Or are you already a fan of e-bikes and you're now kicking yourself for not seeing this value option sooner? Whatever the case though, I always enjoy hearing your many and varied views on e-bikes in the comments, so please leave a comment down below, and while you do that, I'm going to go off and enjoy the rest of this ride flying around some of these forest trails. But as ever, thank you very much for watching. I hope you found that interesting, hope you found it informative, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.